Hello everyone and welcome back to Design, Draw, Do. In today's video I wanted to experiment and do something a little different by trying a mixed media urban sketch, and in this video I'll just be walking through my process and my thoughts, and hopefully you can take something useful out of this. So the first thing I did was I needed to find a reference image to work from, and in order to do this I went on the website mapcrunch.com, which is a really cool website that takes you to random locations around the globe, and I basically just started clicking through. You can see there's like a green go button which just takes you to random places, and you can just look around and have some fun exploring the world. And luckily I found the image that I wanted within a couple of tries, so I just used that. The next thing I did was to do some thumbnail sketches. Now, this is really important because it helps you to establish the composition, and it helps you to kind of work out things before you actually get started. Unfortunately, the camera kept losing focus, so I had to skip quite a bit of it, but you can see on the left-hand side of the page, I've done a few thumbnail sketches to try and work out what I wanted the composition to look like. So I actually changed the position of the tree. In the original image, it's on the right-hand side, but I wanted it to sit on the left side of the house and not be such a dominant feature. I kind of made it a bit smaller and look like it was sitting next to the house as opposed to standing in front of it. In the bottom right corner on the left page, you can see it's kind of darker. That's where I used charcoal. And then in this right-hand side of the page, I'm using my hard pastel creator colors, which are in different shades of grey, to kind of get a more detailed or nuanced black and white value study of the composition, which is where I'm basically working out where I want the darkest parts of the final piece to be and where I want the lightest parts to be. So once that was all done, I got onto actually drawing the piece onto the watercolor paper. Now, I'm using hot pressed watercolor paper. I just got this as a sheet from the art store, so I have no idea which brand it is. But the reason I'm using hot pressed is because the pen will actually go onto the page smoother. So the difference between hot pressed and cold pressed watercolor paper is that cold pressed means that there is a texture to the paper, which means it's kind of more of a rougher edge, whereas hot pressed means there's slightly less texture because they've kind of smoothed it all down. And this makes for better watercolor application as well as pen application. So this was why I used hot press. As you can see, I'm kind of just filling it in with, initially I started with a 0.05 pen, which was doing okay, but then I wanted a bit more of a thicker line, so I then switched to 0.1 later on. And I'm using a Uniball pen, and later on I use a Faber Castell, which is the white pen. After I did the initial sketch, then it was time to do watercolor. Now, before I actually jumped into doing the final piece, it's always good to do some practice pieces and some studies, and I felt a bit, let's say, stiff in terms of my watercolor usage. I've always been a bit stiff when using watercolor, but lately I've been trying to be a bit more loose and free and just letting the watercolor do its thing. So I did a few like really random loose studies of just random objects before I got started, and then I did a smaller version of the original painting just to kind of loosen myself up and see which colors I would use, which is what you can see me doing here. As you can see, I'm just being quite loose with the watercolor by using a lot of water and letting the paint run. Doing this in the beginning stages allows for a bit more of a looser impressionistic style of painting, which is what I've learned from Susan Jenkins from Monet Cafe. I can't speak about her enough. I really, really love her videos and her work and her mindset when she comes to art. All right, now I'm moving into the actual piece. So I'm starting to lay down the watercolors. Again, just using a lot of water, being quite loose and free and not too restrictive. I am controlling it a bit, like for example, if the background trees kind of blur into the sky a bit too much, I do dab it off because I did want to control that a bit. But in terms of if the foreground bleeds into each other, like I wasn't too fussed about it, and it gave quite good results and unexpected results that I think I wouldn't have gotten if I'd kind of been very, very controlling and restrictive of the watercolor paint. As you can see, what I'm doing is I'm just building up the color layer by layer. It's important that you don't just dump really saturated color straight onto the paper, because watercolor, the whole point of it is that it's supposed to be a light medium. You're supposed to keep layering it so that you retain the lightness that you kind of get in the beginning, and you don't kind of muddy the colors straight away. So that's why I kept layering on top of each other. You can also use a hairdryer to speed up the process, though I do find that the drying itself, like the actual, the look of it kind of changes a bit because the water is being pushed into different places by the hairdryer. So it kind of depends. It's a bit of a waiting game. Luckily, this paper is quite absorbent, so it absorbed the water relatively fast, as opposed to the paper that I used for my studies, where the water kind of just sat on the paper. It's really cool to see in this time lapse that as time goes by, you can slowly see the color building up. I think that's something that's really fascinating. Alright, now that the watercolor is done, I finally moved on to the last step, which was soft pastel. So for this, I always like to work with soft pastel on an easel or a kind of angled surface, because there's a lot of powder that collects. So I have like a little foil sheet at the bottom of my easel to collect the dust of the soft pastel. Otherwise there's going to be soft pastel everywhere. So always make sure you do soft pastels on an angled surface. All I'm doing in the soft pastel edition, let's say, is I'm just kind of pumping up the colors, because watercolor, it's nice and it gives a good underpainting, but it doesn't give the vibrancy that you really want, or that I really wanted. So I basically just used the watercolor base as a roadmap for which colors I would put down. So as you can see, I matched the blues and the greens, and then I just kept on adding colors as I saw fit throughout the painting. And another really important point is to make sure that you're using the same color throughout different areas of the painting to give a more cohesive look. So for example, you can see that I brought down the blue into the foreground, into those orange grassy things, to kind of make it darker but also bring it together. So you can see the midground and the foreground are more cohesively aligned because they have the same blue running through them. And in the same way, I also brought up the orange from the foreground to the midground by adding it a bit on the tops of the trees. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I just had a lot of fun doing this. It took about half a day just because I was interrupted in between, but I think it's something that is quite interesting to try, and it was a really nice process. Normally, I'm kind of the kind of person who just likes to do a one and done, like I'll just do a sketch and that's it, that's my art piece. But it was really nice to actually see how all the different mediums can layer on top of each other and assist in making a rich and vibrant piece. Looking back on it, there are a few things I would change. Like for example, I feel like the painting itself doesn't have enough depth. It kind of feels a bit two-dimensional. And the tree, I realised later on, it's quite straight actually. It would have been nice if it was a bit more organic, because it looks a bit fake. And also the grasses, I'm not too sure if I'm a big fan of them. I don't know if it kind of just detracts from the painting more than it adds to it. But other than that, I'm actually really happy with the process which led to the end result, as opposed to the end result on its own. And I hope you learned something from this video, and maybe you'll try a mixed media urban sketch yourself. With that, I will end this video here, and I'll see you next week for another video. Oh, and by the way, if you guys are interested in seeing the long version of this video, I can definitely upload that. I mean, it's about just over 1 hour if I just upload these time lapses without speeding them up. But I'd be super happy to post them. I know that I'm a big fan of paint along kind of videos, but there won't be any commentary. It will probably just be some nature sounds in the background. But if you want me to upload that, I'd be happy to do so. Let me know in the comments how you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next week for another one. Bye!